The day my daughter handed me a folder across my own kitchen table and told me to sign, I smiled, offered her more coffee, and said I needed a few days to think it over. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I had already spent 7 months making sure that folder meant absolutely nothing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started. Because the ending only makes sense if you understand who I was before any of this happened. My name is Lorraine. I'm 61 years old. I spent 32 years working as an office manager for a mid-size insurance firm in Columbus, Ohio. I was not the woman who made scenes. I was not the woman who called her daughter every morning, or showed up at holidays with an agenda. I was the woman who kept the books, kept the peace, and kept her observations to herself. My coworkers called me the one who noticed everything and said nothing. I took it as a compliment. My husband Walter was a contractor. Not flashy, not loud. He built custom homes for 28 years and he built them the way he built everything else in his life. Slowly, carefully, without ever asking for recognition. He grew up with nothing and he remembered it. We still used coupons at the grocery store when Walter had 3 rental properties and a retirement account that would have made most of our neighbors faint. He didn't believe in showing money. He believed in having it. We had one daughter, Meredith. She was sharp and beautiful and had her father's jaw and my stubbornness, which is a combination that works well in business and not always well in families. She graduated from Ohio State, got a job in marketing, moved to Cincinnati at 26. We were proud. We told her so. Walter got his diagnosis when Meredith was 31. Pancreatic. Stage 3. The doctors gave us a timeline and they were to the day, almost exactly right. In his last month, Walter did something I didn't fully understand at the time. He called our attorney, a deliberate and careful man named Mr. Okafor, and he restructured everything. The rental properties, the investment accounts, the savings, all of it was placed in a revocable living trust with me as sole trustee. Meredith was named as a remainder beneficiary, meaning she would inherit but only at my death, or at such time as I chose to release assets to her directly. Walter had written the terms himself, in consultation with Mr. Offer, and the language was specific. The distribution to Meredith was entirely at my discretion. There was no automatic transfer. There was no timeline she could point to and say, by this date. He also left me a letter, sealed. He told me to read it that first night alone and then to put it somewhere safe, and to only share it with Meredith if and when I believed she had become the person he hoped she would be. I read it. I wept. I folded it back into the envelope and put it in the fireproof box in my closet, behind the extra blankets, where I keep things that matter most. I want to be clear about something. In the year after Walter died, Meredith was good to me. She called twice a week. She came home for Thanksgiving and Christmas. She helped me sort through Walter's workshop, which was the hardest day I've had since the funeral. I thought for a while that we were going to be okay. That grief had clarified things for both of us. Corey arrived 18 months after Walter passed. Meredith introduced him at Easter dinner. He was 38, worked in real estate development, had a kind of easy confidence that I initially mistook for warmth. He knew how to fill a room. He laughed at the right moments. He asked about Walter, which I noticed, which I credited him for, and he seemed genuinely curious about the family. But here is what I also noticed, because I am the woman who notices things and says nothing. He asked, while helping clear the table, how long I'd owned the house. He asked whether the neighborhood had changed much. He asked whether I'd looked into any of the senior living communities that had been built on the east side of Columbus. Not aggressively, almost offhandedly. The way someone asks when they already know the answer and are just checking whether you do too. I said the neighborhood was lovely, that the house suited me fine, and that I'd looked into exactly nothing. I smiled and handed him a dish towel. Over the next several months, the changes came in layers. First, Meredith's calls shifted. Less about how I was doing, more about what I was thinking. About the house, about my plans. Were the stairs getting hard? Had I thought about what made sense long-term? She started using that phrase, long-term, as if my life were a lease approaching expiration. Then the visits became less frequent. Then they stopped being visits and started being check-ins. Quick, purposeful. She and Corey would come together, stay 2 hours, leave. Corey always had somewhere to be. Meredith always seemed slightly distracted. like she was tracking a conversation she wasn't quite having out loud. Then came the phrases. Corey thinks it might be time. Corey mentioned that homes like this are in really high demand right now. Corey feels like you might be happier somewhere with less upkeep. I recognized it. Not from personal experience but from the families I'd watched over 32 years at that insurance firm. People who came in to update policies after a parent's death. People whose stories, told in the matter-of-fact language of paperwork and claims, revealed the same patterns over and over. The slow redirect, the incremental isolation, the way a reasonable-sounding person can reframe someone else's entire life until the original owner of that life can barely recognize it. I was not going to be one of those people, but I was also not going to say that out loud. I kept bringing the good coffee when they visited. I kept asking Corey about his projects. I kept my face pleasant and my observations to myself. And then I called Mr. Okafor. What I asked him to do first was simple. Explain to me in plain language exactly what Corey could and could not legally claim if he and Meredith were to marry. Ohio is not a community property state. Corey would have no automatic claim to anything in the trust. But Mr. Okafor also told me something else. If I were to be pressured into signing over assets, if there were ever documented evidence of coercion or undue influence, that would matter legally. It would matter significantly, I said. Good. I need you to help me start documenting. Mr. Okafor connected me with an investigator named James, who worked quietly and billed even more quietly and sent me reports in plain manila envelopes that I read at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and then filed in a box I kept in the back of my car. What James found, over the following 3 months, was not subtle once you saw it assembled. Corey had a previous marriage. He had been married for 4 years to a woman in her late 50s, significantly older than him, who owned commercial property in the Columbus suburb where he'd grown up. The marriage had ended 2 years before Corey met Meredith. The divorce proceedings had included allegations from Corey's ex-wife of financial pressure, unauthorized access to accounts, and attempts to influence the transfer of property. The case had been settled. The terms were sealed, but the public court record showed that the settlement had included a financial component and a no-contact clause. There was more. Corey's real estate development company, which he described to us as thriving, had 2 outstanding liens against it, business debts, totaling just over $190,000, that had been filed with the county in the past 18 months. The company's registered address was a mailbox service in a strip mall off I-270. And here is the part that made me set down my coffee mug and sit very still for a long moment. 3 weeks before Corey and Meredith's engagement, which I had also learned about through a photo. Meredith posted online, not through a phone call. Meredith had added Corey to a joint savings account. The account was in her name. The balance, which I only knew because Meredith had once mentioned it casually when asking my advice about savings, had been just over $40,000. By the time James pulled the information he legally could, the account balance had dropped by more than half. I did not confront Meredith. I want to be clear about that choice, because I have thought about it many times since. I could have sat her down. I could have laid out everything I'd found. I could have said, look at this. Look at who you're marrying. Look at what he's already doing. But I had watched what happened to women who did that, who confronted directly, loudly, in the middle of emotion. Their daughters stopped calling. Their sons stopped visiting. They were cast as the problem. The controlling one, the one who couldn't let go. And the person they were trying to warn just held tighter to the one they'd been warned against. So I did not confront. I documented, I protected, and I waited. The folder appeared on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Meredith and Corey arrived together. I had coffee ready. I'd made the oatmeal cookies that Meredith had loved since she was 7. I set them on the table and we sat down. And Corey told me, very reasonably, very warmly, that they were thinking seriously about their future, and that they'd been doing a lot of research, and that it might make sense, given the size of the house and the upkeep involved, and the fact that I was on my own, to talk about transitioning the property. He used the word transitioning, as if the house were a project in a portfolio. Meredith said they would make sure I was taken care of. That was her exact phrase, taken care of, as if I were a liability being managed. There was a folder. Inside were documents, a property transfer form, a quitclaim deed, a letter, drafted by an attorney I did not know, suggesting that the transfer was consistent with good estate planning, and that it was in my best interest to simplify my holdings at this stage of life. I looked at my daughter. She was watching the table instead of me. I asked her one question, just one. Meredith, is this what you want? Not what makes sense, not what Corey thinks. What do you want? She looked at Corey before she answered. She didn't answer. I told them I needed time to review the documents. I offered more coffee. I walked them to the door, and I hugged my daughter the way I have hugged her every time she has left my house since she was 18 years old, because I was not going to let Corey see that anything had changed. When the door closed, I stood in my hallway for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and called Mr. Okafor and told him it was time. What Mr. Okafor had built, over the 7 months of quiet preparation, was a structure that the folder on my kitchen table had no power over whatsoever. The house had been placed in the trust before Corey ever sat at my table. The quitclaim deed Meredith had brought me could not transfer what the trust held. The attorney whose letter was in that folder either didn't know that, or was hoping I didn't. Either way, the document was essentially decorative. But that was not the thing I had been building toward. Mr. Okafor had drafted a formal letter summarizing the findings from James's investigation. The prior marriage, the court record, the liens, the joint account drawdown. The letter was factual. No accusations, no emotional language. Just dates, amounts, case numbers, and a note indicating that this documentation was being retained in connection with the trust, and would be submitted to the court in the event of any future legal dispute over the estate. He had also drafted a separate letter to Meredith. Not to threaten, not to control, to inform. A letter that laid out, plainly and carefully, what the trust contained, what Corey's financial situation actually looked like, and what the previous legal proceedings against him had involved. I chose the timing carefully. I did not send it when I was angry. I did not send it in response to the folder. I waited 3 weeks. I waited until they had set a wedding date, which I also learned through a social media post, and until I was certain that what I was about to do would land at the moment it could do the most good. I sent the letter to Meredith on a Thursday evening in April at 7:12 p.m., which I know precisely because I stood in my kitchen and watched the send confirmation appear on my screen. I forwarded a copy to Mr. Okafor with a timestamp. Then I sat down and ate the leftover soup I'd made that morning, and I watched the news and I went to bed. I did not hear from Meredith that night. I did not hear from her the next day. On Saturday morning, my phone rang at 8:46 a.m. It was Meredith. She did not say hello. She said, "Mom, is this real?" I said, "Every word of it." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He told me the court thing was his ex-wife lying. He told me the business stuff was being handled. He told me." And she stopped. I said, "I know what he told you," she said. "How long have you known?" I said, "Long enough to be sure." Another silence. "I need to see you." She came alone. No Corey. She sat at the same kitchen table where she had once sat across from me with a folder and a quitclaim deed, and she looked smaller than I had seen her look since she was a child. I made tea. I sat down across from her and I did not say "I told you so." I did not say I knew from the beginning. I did not perform the satisfaction of being right, because I was not satisfied. I was heartbroken in the particular way that parents are heartbroken when they have watched something happen that they could not prevent, without losing the person they were trying to protect. She told me everything, in the way that people tell things when the story they'd been given collapses, and the real story has to come out somewhere. Corey had told her, within the first 6 months of their relationship, that I had never truly supported her, that my love had always come with conditions, that the way I held on to the house and the trust was a form of control, a way of keeping her tethered to my expectations. He had said it gently, repeatedly, in the patient way of someone who is not making an argument but planting a seed. He had said it until Meredith had started to feel it as her own thought. She had not come to my house with that folder because she wanted to take my home. She had come because somewhere in the previous 2 years she had been slowly persuaded that the house was a symbol of something that was keeping her from her own life. She had believed that. She had believed Corey when he told her that getting me to sign was actually a form of liberation, for both of us. That is what that kind of influence does. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like a realization. It feels like you finally understood something about your own life that you'd been too afraid to see. She hadn't seen it. I had seen it for both of us. What happened after that was not fast, and I will not pretend it was clean. Meredith ended the engagement. Corey did not accept that quietly. He retained an attorney and sent a letter claiming that he had made financial and personal sacrifices in anticipation of the marriage, and that he was owed compensation. Mr. Okafor's response was 4 pages long, included the case numbers from the prior court proceedings, the documentation of the account drawdown, and a note that James's full report would be available for discovery in the event of litigation. Corey's attorney did not respond to that letter. Corey was gone within 2 weeks. I don't know where. I didn't look. The money Meredith had lost from her savings account, more than $22,000. As it turned out, she did not recover in full. Some of it came back when she closed the joint account and disputed certain transfers. Some of it is simply gone. She knows that. She doesn't talk about it often, but when she does, she's clear-eyed about it. She said once, not bitterly, just plainly, I paid a lot to learn that lesson. I told her the tuition was steep, but the education was real. Corey's previous ex-wife, the one from the sealed settlement, reached out to Meredith through a mutual connection 3 months later. She was not supposed to discuss the terms of her settlement. She didn't. But she said enough for Meredith to understand that she had not been the first, and that the woman before her had not walked away with her savings intact either. Meredith spent several months working through what had happened with a therapist she found on her own, which I considered a sign of genuine health. She started calling me again the way she used to call, not to check in, not to manage a situation, just to talk, to tell me about work, about a podcast she'd been listening to, about the dog she was thinking about adopting. Normal things. The kind of normal that you don't recognize as precious until it's been gone. One Sunday in October, she came for dinner, and we cooked together the way we used to when she was in high school, both of us at the counter, talking over each other, stealing tastes from the pot. After dinner we sat on the back porch with our coffee and she asked me, out of nowhere, whether I still had her father's letter, the one he'd left me. I told her I'd been keeping it, that her father had asked me to share it with her when I believed she was ready. She asked quietly whether I thought she was ready. I went inside and got it from the fireproof box and I brought it out to the porch and I handed it to her. She read it by the light coming through the back window. I watched her face. She got to the end, and her chin went tight the way it does when she's trying not to cry. Walter had written, Meredith, if you're reading this, your mother kept her promise. She protected you in ways you may not have known you needed. She is the person who made our family real. Don't let the world tell you that quiet means weak. The most solid things I ever built were the ones nobody saw me building. She taught me that. Meredith folded the letter and held it in both hands and didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, I want to be more like you, Mom. I told her she already was, in the ways that mattered. She had her father's instinct for knowing when something was worth building. She just had to learn, the hard way, which things deserved it. We stayed on that porch until the coffee went cold and the neighborhood got quiet. And I thought about Walter, about the 31 years we spent doing things slowly and carefully and without fanfare. I thought about the way he had seen the ending coming before I had arranged what he could, and had trusted me to do the rest. I thought about Corey sitting at my kitchen table, looking at my house the way he looked at everything, like a transaction waiting to complete. I thought about the folder and the quitclaim deed, and the attorney's letter that assumed I was a woman who could be handed a document and wouldn't know what to do with it. He saw an older woman alone in a house. He saw someone who would be grateful for guidance, grateful for the attention of someone who appeared to have answers. He saw the wrong thing entirely. I have thought, since then, about the women I know who are in the middle of something like this right now, who are being slowly told that their instincts are wrong, that their feelings are a burden, that the love they've given is actually a form of control. Mothers who are watching their children be turned by degrees, so gradually that by the time the turn is complete, it doesn't look like a turn at all. It just looks like the way things are. I am not here to tell you what to do. Every family has its own shape, its own fractures, its own history. What worked for me was specific to my circumstances and I know that. But I will tell you this. The people who underestimate you are telling you something about themselves. They are telling you where they are not paying attention. And that is exactly where you should be working. Don't fight loudly. Don't beg to be believed. Build quietly, document carefully, and trust that the truth does not need to be announced to be real. It just needs to be ready at the right moment, because that moment will come. And when it does, you want to be the one who has been preparing for it all along. This is Mara Payback. If any part of this felt familiar, if you recognized something in this story, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. We'll see you in the next one.